Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to be real brief here. I was asked to just do a quick intro for General Dempsey, who's joining us this morning. So for those that may not know, General Dempsey served in the United States Army for 41 years. His last assignment was as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the senior officer in the Armed Forces and military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President. So General Dempsey has been here at FUCA with us for a few years now, right, sir? Yep. So he's given us an hour of his time this morning. We've given him a few questions to prompt him. The general gist of what we're going to be discussing this morning is turning disruption into destiny. So with that, sir, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Well, thanks. I'm happy to be here with you. I didn't realize that one of my objectives was to get you to wake up. If I'd known that, I would have probably worn a funny wig or something to help us get through that part of it. So I hope you're all awake, but you know, if you're not, you're not, and I won't know it, and I won't be insulted by it. But I do hope to get a chance to get some feedback, because when I do these sessions, and the reason I'm here as a second career in academia is one of my kind of principles of leadership is you really have to embrace the idea of lifelong learning. And I'm going to go back and look at your slide, because what I hope I can do in this brief period of time together, and then maybe subsequently, because as they said, I am here at Duke for another couple of years, and I'd like to continue to pull that thread on, how do we focus in on the real, that which is most important about leadership. So I hope I can contribute a little bit to your thinking about that today, but maybe you can also help me learn some things, which would be great for me, because I got to leave here and go down and teach a class downstairs in Kirby, and everybody's kind of interested in the same things these days, right? And it's good that we're interested in. Okay. Before you got on, I was also lamenting that this is by way of asking you not to be too impressed by my credentials, because I couldn't even get in the damn hallway today, because my card let me in the front door, wouldn't let me in the hallway, and I had to stand there forlornly until somebody could come along and help me get to my office. So there you have it. You go from being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and spending every week, hours in the sit room in the Oval Office, and now I can't even get into FUCA. There's some things, I know the topic is turning disruption into destiny, and I don't have to spend much time convincing you that we're living in kind of an era. I'm not sure how long it'll last, but we've had our lives disrupted certainly over the last 9 months, but I think it's actually longer than that, and I think it'll persist for a good bit of time. And I chose that title to motivate myself into realizing that even though we've all studied the fact that there are opportunities in crisis, never waste a crisis. Is that what you get in the classroom for, when you're studying crisis leading and crisis management? And it feels kind of it feels like a trite phrase until you're living it. And now, not only am I trying to work within Duke, not only the FUCA school, but the entire university, to help at the athletic department and the office of the president figure out, what does this look like in March? I'm also a consultant to Adam Silver in the NBA, and had discussions about the bubble that they formed to end 2020, and that went really well. But we've got 2021 staring us in the face, and the pandemic is still going to be here at some level of risk certainly for the next season, and potentially even beyond. And I'm the chairman of USA Basketball, and we haven't, that's the group that puts together teams from under 16 up to and including the Olympic men and women, 5-on-5 and 3-on-3, to compete globally. And we haven't done that lately for obvious reasons. But FIBA, the governing body for basketball internationally, is trying to, they want to get back at it. And so you know, what we're trying to do now is figure out how to shape that as the nation in the world with the most credible basketball program. And so, you know, it is disruption to destiny, it's challenge to opportunity. But there's another aspect of it that I think we ought to look right in the eye, and that is that it's also overcoming fear. Because if you think about the three things we're all dealing with now, and by the way, there's more, but let's pick three that are converging, you know, three separate crises converging and, you know, and accelerating and accenting and exacerbating each other. And of course, clearly one is the pandemic. You know, we're all fearful at some level, probably those in my age group more so than those in your age group, but everyone's fearful about either catching it themselves or transmitting to someone they love. And, you know, I mean, look, I don't have to tell you about all the different scenarios that could continue to evolve in some ways expectedly and in others unexpectedly related to the pandemic. And if you fast forward to March, this is just hypothetically, I don't have any insider knowledge, but it's the kind of thing that I'm trying to help shape people's thinking about. If you fast forward to March, there'll probably be a vaccine. In fact, there's likely to be a vaccine. Some percentage of the population will be fearful, there's that word, about taking it. Personally, I'm going to take it, but I'm probably not going to be the first one in line. You know, I mean, I think we have to admit that there's been a certain erosion of trust in the institutions that are responsible for producing it, and we've got to overcome that. But the point is, in March, a certain percentage, let's call it 15% of the population, won't take it. And we all know it's going to be approximately 60% effective. So in March, you still got risk to address. And right now we're dealing with 100% risk, let's say, mitigated away by social distancing and by wearing a mask and all those, and, you know, sanitation. But in March, there's going to be 40% risk. And the question for those who are, you know, trying to find a new normal, hopefully a better normal, actually. I don't want to be one that becomes satisfied with returning to normal. I think we can do better than that in a lot of ways. We've still got that facing us for the foreseeable future, and we can figure it out if we build a certain amount of, in some cases, rebuild, and in other cases, from a standing start, build some trust to get that done. But that's one crisis. The second is our economy. Now, you're in business school, so you probably know more about this than I do. But I don't know what the lingering effects of the cost of the pandemic will be and how quickly the economy will rebound. I mean, again, everything becomes political. Some people argue that it'll be V-shaped, others that it'll be U-shaped, some it'll be W-shaped. And I'm thinking to myself, why does it have to take the shape of a letter? I mean, is there no other way we can think about this thing? But the bigger point is, there will be an effect. It'll be felt inequitably across the country. There will be some people who suffer far more than others, notably, I think, the service industry. And, that's a national problem. That's, in my judgment, in any case, and we've got to contribute to helping figure that out. But in the meantime, I addressed a bunch of high school seniors recently, again, by Zoom, and they're fearful that the workplace they aspired to enter, the careers they aspire to follow may not be available to them, at least for some time. And so there's another level of fear, and you may have the same fears, I don't know, but there's another level of fear. And then the third one, notably, of course, is the fear that if you're a man or woman of color in this country, you're fearful that nothing is going to change. It's just going to be, we've had this recent series of issues. Everybody got interested in it, got enthusiastic, but it's not going to change. That's a fear. And then there's other people around the country, as you know, and I'm not being I am being a little judgmental, but there's other people around the country that are afraid that things will change. So you got the population, some of which are fearful that things will change, and others that are fearful that they won't change. The point is that word is present in both of those descriptions, and the word is fear about social justice and racial inequality and wage disparity and and health and the economy. And I'm pretty sure I've probably woken you up by now. So I've accomplished, objective number one. But really, we really shouldn't avoid the fact that most of what we're doing right now has an underpinning of fear. Okay, why is that important if you're a leader? Well, because it's only leaders who can help us overcome those fears. And the way we help each other overcome fear is by developing a sense of belonging. There is only one antidote, literally one antidote. And I can speak with some authority about. There's only one antidote to fear, and it's belonging. It's feeling a sense of belonging, of shared, of sharing experiences with another group of people who are going through the same thing you are and who are kind of trying to overcome that obstacle as you are. Now, how can I speak from authority with that? Look, when we send young men and women to Iraq and Afghanistan, we put them on base camps and we tell them, okay, tomorrow you're going to go out the gate with your 12 teammates and perform a patrol. There is no way on the face of the earth that they will go out that gate unless they feel a sense of belonging with that little team, that they trust the man or woman to their left or right. They trust that the mission is important enough to risk their lives. They trust that the chaplain will be there if he or she is needed, that the medic will be there, that the helicopter to evacuate them will be there, that somebody's taking care of their family back in the United States. So the fear is real. The sense of belonging overcomes it with a sense of trust that is built and earned and re-earned over time. That's the reality of overcoming fear. And we really ought to talk about, in my judgment, we really ought to talk about our current situation in terms of, yes, we got to overcome the science of a pandemic. Yes, we've got to overcome the science of an economic, repression, depression, whatever you're going to call it. Yes, we should talk about the mechanism necessary to overcome social justice issues, but we got to acknowledge that what we're really trying to overcome is fear. That's a leader's responsibility. And I'm not sure how to get that on your t-shirt, but maybe you can figure that out. The other thing that leaders have to do in that climate of converging fear-inducing crises is be sense makers. We've really got to, I say we because, you aspire to be leaders or you wouldn't ask me to be here talking to you today. A leader these days has to be a sense maker. We live in an era of ubiquitous information, complexity, intense scrutiny on leaders, whether they're, by the way, not just intense scrutiny on leaders in the public domain, but the private domain, and parents, for Pete's sakes, and teachers and healthcare workers. I mean, nothing happens, as you know, that isn't pretty much readily apparent and easily distributed. And so we live in an era of intense scrutiny. And in that environment, there's a tendency for people to look around to try to, who is it that's going to help me understand that? Personally, I think that's a leadership responsibility, whether you're leading a family or whether you're leading a corporation or whether you're leading a military organization or whether you're leading a university, or whatever you go off and lead, the easy analogy for me with you is some of you are going to be financial advisors and you might have 100 clients or 1,500 clients if you get really good at it. But, they want to know, oh my God, I just read on, Vox that the market's going to crash and we're all going to be impoverished and it's going to look like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. What should I do? Should I take my money and put it in my mattress or should I buy gold? I mean, that's, and it used to be that was an academic exercise because the margins were, were kind of marginal. You weren't looking at, huge sweeps of change in markets like we do now. And, people are going to look to you to be a sense maker about that. And in our communities, I think we've all got to help be sense makers about solving the three crises that I described: the pandemic, the economy, and the way we relate to each other, as Americans, which clearly can stand to be improved upon. But that's a leader's responsibility. And it's not just the leader, it's leaders, plural. And I really strongly believe that. One other point about overcoming fear. I think I did see the word resilient on your future t-shirt. That's a word that's really interests me a great deal. And I've thought a lot about it because, and often when I try to think about a word that I want to confront in a new and refreshing way, is I try to find its opposite. And if I can find its opposite, then I feel like I have an opportunity to meander my way like Aristotle to the Aristotelian mean. What's the opposite of resilient? Some people would say fragile, but that didn't do much for me when I began my personal journey to try to understand resilience. But you'll hear, it's an important word right now, because you'll hear people say, we've got to make sure the economy is resilient. We've got to be resilient in the face of the pandemic. We've got to be resilient in the face of protests and so forth. And so, but the opposite of resilience, not fragile. For me, the opposite of fragile is not resilient. The opposite of fragile is getting something done. You know what I mean? I mean, you can be resilient all day, but if you don't get anything done, it might be you feel personally, you can look the 3 crises in the eye and not shrivel away. Okay, but you got to get something done at the end of the day if you want to make resilience matter. So, for me, it's some combination of idea to action and talk to traction and, fear to resilience, but with a bias for action. And that's when I saw that phrase on your list of questions, because, one of the things we'll probably talk about today is how do you build this sense of belonging? How do you establish a foundation of trust with your team? And one of the important ways I believe you do that is by being inclusive, not just bringing diversity into your particular team, but participation. So, diversity is a payroll issue often. You'll see organizations that say, okay, I've got this many men, this many women, this many, African Americans, this many Hispanic. And, in fact, the military does that. We publish, how closely do we reflect the society we serve? That's great. You got to do that. But if you don't include them, if you're not inclusive, if they don't have the same opportunities to, rise within the organization, if they don't feel a sense of belonging and contribution, they're just drawing the paycheck because, they were lucky enough to be part of the diversity initiative. That's not going to get us where we need to go. And so, inclusion is, in my judgment, a necessary step, get from diversity to inclusion. But inclusion takes more time, actually. When you think about having a meeting and making sure everybody is included, it's going to take you more time than if the leader just comes in and gives out the marching orders and everybody nods knowingly and off we go. And then we all go to the water cooler and talk about it, which is the worst thing that can happen in an organization. Say it in the room is a phrase that I often pound away, when I was sitting at the head of the table. So, that's why, we've got this kind of nexus, intersection and convergence of crises, but also the words that we've used in the past to describe what we should do in a crisis. And now we've actually got to walk the talk, and we've got to do that by being inclusive, establishing belonging, building trust, and getting something done, not just, hoping that, next March we'll be fine because there'll be a vaccine and we'll have herd immunity. We won't go down that path. But anyway, so that's kind of the disruption to destiny. If you don't remember anything I said about it, just please remember that that there are opportunities for us to be better at the end of all of this, but it's not enough just to be resilient and rebound. We've got to decide that the new normal, whatever it is going to be a better normal than the one we started with on March the 16th or whenever it was. So, and that's actually more your job than mine. And in some ways I had my chance, but I think some of the characteristics, how much time have I? Okay. So I'm almost at the 27 minutes. You know what I think I do? I've got a list of characteristics here that I think are the leadership attributes that I would be looking for if I were you in your leaders as you go out and find them, but also that you will embrace to become the leaders that we need you to be. But let me turn it back here to, I think it was to Teddy or Ben or someone, and tell me how you want to, if that little diatribe there generated any questions. And if it did, that's great. I'll begin to take them. But if not, I also have the 15 that you sent me ahead of time.
Yes, sir. Well, like you said, I think everyone's awake. We got some questions coming in. So to kind of merge a question that was sent before, as well as in the moment now, can you maybe pull the thread a little more on managing fear within an organization? Maybe as when time is an issue as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm right, or I should probably say, if you agree that the level of fear today is probably greater than it was in March, when all of this seems to have started. Although even that's probably not fair to say it. Everything that happened began on March 16th. I mean, a lot of it was just exacerbated in the spring. But the point is, the fear was either always there, but we could somewhat ignore it, or it just became a part of our daily life, and then it got politicized. The fear did. As the fear can be a tool, and it can be wielded positively, and it can be wielded negatively, and we've seen examples of that both uses of fear. So to pull the thread a bit, though, the first thing to do is acknowledge it. You don't have to grab your team and say, "Now look, I know you're all scared to death," but what you could do is you could, engage in a conversation about your fears. So, meaning acknowledge your own fears. And my instinct is that your team, will be likely to agree. Or if they don't agree, that's actually a good step as well. In other words, if they say, "Well, I don't really share those fears. My own personal fears are somewhat different." But the point is, we all fear something. My suggestion to you is, right now I think we're all fearful of very, very similar things, which provides an opportunity, I think. And then the second part of, pulling the thread, as you described it, is, again, this I would assert, you can agree with it or not, but there's only one antidote, and that's building a sense of belonging. There are people out there, and I've seen them in the military, who, confronted with fear, just try to blow by it with bluster, it's the posturing of a leader who feels like they have to posture. And I'm not a fan of posturing in leaderships. I don't think leaders should try to be something other than what they are. And I think my personal belief is that the best leaders I've worked for allowed me to see them as regular people, more so than, some iconic figure who never had a doubt or a fear in his or her life. But some leaders are like that. So my suggestion would be, let's acknowledge it, acknowledge fear, then build that sense of belonging. And in particular, take that sense of belonging in through inclusion to trust, because really where you're trying to get is trust, and that's why I said sense maker is another part of that. If you can help people make sense of this, make them feel like they belong, that their contributions matter, and that they matter to you, I just think you kind of unleash them. They can then confront their fear and try to be part of the solution in a way that might surprise us. So that's my belief, and it's built on having taken in some cases, tens of thousands of men and women into the most fearful environment of all. And having tried things both ways, I tried to be the George C. Scott Patton figure and give a big, impressive speech on a stage with the giant American flag behind me. Frankly, that didn't change anything. But when I began to circulate around the battlefield, I was in Baghdad. When I began to spend time, invest my time in the team to figure out what were they, confronting, what were they fearful about, how could I contribute, even at my level at the time, I was a 2-star general, how could I contribute to the mission? Then all of a sudden you've got a real team, not just a bunch of people pulled together for a common purpose with a figurehead. And another word, the other thing you could, if you want another word for your T-shirt that I don't think I saw there, was humility. I do think, maybe I missed it, but I am a really strong believer that the best leaders I've worked for were humble. And why does that matter? Because we like people to be humble? Well, of course, I like people to be humble, because generally those people will share credit and accept responsibility better than others, but they're also more approachable. I always found if someone has a sense of humility, and are actually in awe of the fact that they've had this privilege of leading, they're approachable in a way that, and you can give them advice or even disagree with them, and it won't be considered disloyalty. So I think humility is important, but I don't want to give any, this is really all about balancing opposites. So if I say I really think you ought to try to be a humble leader, it doesn't mean you can't be ambitious. I was ambitious as hell. You don't get to be a 4-star general unless you have a certain amount of ambition. But what you want to do is try to channel that ambition, control that ambition, and use that ambition to make the team better, not just yourself. Mike Krzyzewski, by the way, we got a pretty good example of pretty solid leadership here in our basketball team, where, when he was working for us in USA Basketball, coaching the Olympics, a lot of people told him, now you got to make sure these players like LeBron and Anthony Davis and James Harden and Kobe Bryant, you got to tell them to leave their egos at the door. And he did exactly the opposite. He said, no, don't leave your ego at the door. That your ego is what makes you you. Bring it in, but use it on behalf of the team. And so, there's a fine line there. And sometimes you'll find that you can make that happen, and other times you'll come up a bit short. But I think it's the right instinct. Back to you. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So yeah, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm trying to kind of merge some questions. If it's too broad, please let me know and just
Sure.
Answer as such. On the notion of getting to know people, do you have any thoughts on, as you progress up in management and your span of control gets larger and the number of people under you get larger, how do you manage your immediate direct reports, as we call them at school, but also the guys down the line and having influence there as well?
Yeah, and the answer, it is too broad, so I'm not going to answer it. No, I'm kidding. The answer is by reputation, honestly. And I wouldn't have been able to tell you that until I started looking back at it. At the end of my time as chairman, I had 1.2 million men and women on active duty and about another 700,000 guard and reserve. And I always included, when people say, how many people are you influencing? I always included family members, because, in our particular profession, if you don't get the family on board, that volunteer force collapses pretty quick. So, if you think about it, let's say it's 3 million people. And, obviously you can't travel around and look them all in the eye and shake their hands. But what you can do, first of all, social media, there's a case where social media helps. I know that social media gets this reputation. It's neutral. In case you haven't noticed, social media is neutral. You can use it for wonderful purposes, like the ice bucket challenge, to fight ALS. Or you can use it if you're ISIS to, to plan and organize attacks and spread your extreme ideology. So, but the platform is neutral. And so, but I got pretty good at using it actually. And, I had some help. I mean, quite a bit of help in trying to figure out how to message properly and to highlight those attributes that we've been talking about, belonging, inclusion, trust, and humility, sense making. So social media can help. But I said by reputation because I'll tell you what, I worked for, I won't name names, but when I was a 3-star, I worked for one of the most corrosive, you could probably go back on Wikipedia now and figure out who I'm talking about. But I worked for one of the most corrosive 4-stars that I'd ever met. I mean, he was just a curmudgeon. He didn't respect the work that people were doing for him. He was dismissive. He was rude. I mean, I could go on. And in his judgment, because I talked to him about it at one point, I was his deputy. And I just wanted to know, why are you that way with the staff? Because I was trying to get the staff to, produce products for him. And he said, well, I don't have time. I mean, if somebody's beginning a briefing for me and I think they're wasting my time, I'm going to tell them. And I said, well, okay, you can do that, but you'll just shut that person down. They're not going to come back, later and feel confident. And what you need them to be is confident, or you don't need them. If you don't need them, tell me, and we'll just let you do your thing, and we'll try to, sweep up behind you. So I remembered that. And for example, I mean, it was often the case on a daily basis in the Pentagon, where if I was getting ready to go to a meeting with the president, there'd be a series of briefers. I mean, this is no different than in the private sector, but I'd have a series of briefers come in to prepare me. And of course, the chairman's calendar is really tight. I mean, really tight. I think I estimated at one point that I controlled about 18% of my day. The other part of it was the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Advisor, the President, the Congress, So I valued my time that I had, and my XO valued it. My executive officer, kept the trains running on time. And what he would do with a briefer might be a lieutenant colonel. So, I'm a 4-star general in my mid-50s, late 50s. He's probably a full colonel in his early 40s. And the briefers are lieutenant colonels generally, who are probably, mid-career, and they're in their late 30s. And so late 30s, early 40s. So, they're already intimidated that they got to come and talk to the Wizard of Oz, behind the green curtain. And the XO meets him in the outer office and said, now listen, you got exactly 5 minutes in there. And if you're not out in 5 minutes, I'm coming in, I'm going to grab you and take you out myself, which was all bluster, of course, but he wanted to keep the trains running on time. Well, I knew that. I never told them not to do it. But as soon as and you'll see why, because as soon as they came into my office and they sat down, they would grab they'd have a binder with, you said, Alexis, you said you like PowerPoint. It's the I can't stand PowerPoint. But anyway, they come in with a briefing book and mind you, we have 5 minutes and they've got 30 slides, you've seen that happen. And so they sit down, flip the chart, and immediately start talking. I said, whoa, wait a minute, who are you? And why are you here? And they'd say, sir, what do you mean? I'm the briefer. I'm talking to you today about Syria. And, I said, okay, well, that's great. I'm looking forward to that. But who are you? What's your name? Where are you from? You married? How's your commute? Which is always a great question in Washington, D.C. about the Beltway. But the point is, I didn't want them to think that really all I wanted was that binder. If all I wanted was the binder, I could have had them send the binder in, and the last thing I wanted was them to actually talk to me, read the slide to me, which, by the way, everybody does that. And so I would say, okay, look, we don't have time. I said, I'm going to give you a minute. You pull out 3 slides and you give them to me. And then I'm going to turn them over and I'll look at them at some point. But you tell me what what do I need to know to go to this meeting with the president today in your own words? And what I found was over time that my reputation for making sure people knew their contribution mattered was really good, and it spreads like wildfire. I mean, it just spreads. Or I'd go fly to Afghanistan, and I'd go out to some awful looking combat outpost on the Pakistan border and spend time out there. And before I left, I'd say to the commander or one of the sergeants, I'd say, hey, do me a favor, give my aide your wife's name and her address. And I'm going to send a note, tell her I was out here, and make sure she knows you're doing, what you're doing. And by the way, that took all of, when I got back to the United States, I'd carve out a couple hours, and my XO or my aide would give me that list. And it would take me, I don't know 90 seconds a note. And I would knock out, 10 or 15 or 20 of them and mail them out. And, I'd be walking through an airport, even in retirement, and somebody would say, hey, sir, you don't know who I am, but, you sent my wife a note in, 2014. And then they'll say something like, and that's why I stayed in the Army. And you think to yourself, this isn't really hard. If you dedicate, if it's important to you, it's not hard. If it's not important to you, it's really hard, because everything feels like a drag on your time. But I'm telling you, if you're a leader, it's really about leading the people, not the laptops. Over means back to you.
Roger, sir. Thanks. So I'm going to ask maybe a tougher question, sir. Test your vulnerability here. You touched on families a little bit, and would you mind maybe sharing something personal or other observations you've had of maybe personally reaching a limit of fatigue, exhaustion, frustration, and also trying to be a good friend, a good spouse, a good parent, and how to manage that?
Yeah, that's that whole work-life balance thing, I think, is what you're dancing around a bit, and it's hard. But here's what I've learned over the years: the only one that can establish a work-life balance for you is you. If you're waiting around for your boss to do it, you're going to be waiting a long time. And so that's one of those parts of your, the intersection of your personal and professional life where you've got to take ownership. The other thing is, if you're gonna have a spouse and a family, you got to be, and it depends what kind of line of work you're in, but it feels to me, this is not marriage counseling, by the way, but it feels to me like you need to choose wisely. And I forget what famous, I think it was Maya Angelou said, when somebody tells you or shows you who and what they are, believe them the first time. And so, if you're into a relationship and that relationship looks like it might go sideways on you, if you have one of these jobs that's kind of all consuming, you probably need to find that out before you make that leap rather than after it. And things change in a marriage. I mean, I tell people I wasn't the same chairman in my first year as I was in my last, and I damn sure wasn't the same husband when I think I got married at 24 that I am now, 45 years later. So, not 44 years later. So there's that. And then the last thing is, married life is a bit like, or family life is a bit like, a bit like a bank account. Sometimes you're making deposits and sometimes you're making withdrawals. And in the military profession, for example, the deployments are huge withdrawals of goodwill, because you're gone for 9 months. I think my longest tour of duty was actually, meaning deployed away from home, was 22 months. That's a long time to be away from your family. Now, I did get to go back once for 2 weeks, but the point is, in that case, I wasn't doing anything really to raise the family except try to stay in touch with them. And it was all on my wife's shoulders. So, frankly, in retirement, I think I'm mostly making deposits now, because I can't do any more withdrawals. So, which is why I'm doing this Zoom at 7:30 in the morning, because I had to sneak out of the house while she was still sleeping. No, I'm kidding. She actually likes me to do things like this. Doesn't like to travel much anymore, but she's happy that we're part of Duke. Anyway, so work-life balance. But let me end this where I started. You have to control that. Really, your boss won't. I mean, you may have some bosses who are empathetic about it, and then you'll have some that are decidedly not empathetic about it because they don't care about it. And so, you first of all, you have to figure out what environment you're in, and then you have to take control. And, if you want a work-life balance, you'll have it. And if you don't care about it, you won't have it. It's just as simple as that. Over.
Thanks, sir. So a few folks are interested in balancing respectful disagreement or dissent, as well as being a good follower. And would you mind talking on that a little bit, maybe both at the head of the table leader role, but also as a follower, reporting to someone else?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at the sum total of, let me not tell you to look at the sum total of your life experiences, but let me use mine. And the sum total of my life experiences, I was probably a follower. Well, I was a follower all the time, because I was never, even as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I had plenty of people grading my homework. And of course, I worked directly for the President of the United States. So it was my job to figure out how to be the right follower for him, while at the same time being the leader of the armed forces of the United States. But I'll tell you, the former took a lot more time than the latter, just by the nature of the responsibilities. So I don't think we talk enough about what it means to be a good follower. We spend a lot of time. If you look at the universe of books written about business, for example, most of them are about management, fewer about leadership. That's beginning to turn a little bit now, and people are paying more attention to the difference between leadership and management. But who's going to go and walk through an airport and pick a book off the shelf that says, the art of followership? I mean, that would be the most boring. I can't imagine, that I would ever pull that book off the shelf. And yet, I probably learned more about how let's instead of calling it followership, because that doesn't, it doesn't resonate even with me. But how about trusted advisor? So if you're in business and you have clients, you are their trusted advisor. If you're in a corporation and you are, a junior or senior vice president to a CEO, you are their trusted advisors. Now, they will determine a lot about how much influence you can have on them. But make no mistake about it, a percentage of your job is always going to be, some percentage of it is going to be leading down to your soldiers, in my case, to your clients, in your case, maybe. And a certain percentage is going to be up, trying to help the senior leaders understand, the kind of challenges that they may be unaware of. And so we spend more time as followers, actually, than we do as leaders in our lives. Okay, so if that's the case, then I would say, think about what are the attributes or traits that make, what you're really trying to figure out is what makes for a good leader-follower relationship. And so if you accept that, then I think some of the traits that are important are character. I think that at least for me, I always wanted I wanted the president, let's use that one. I wanted the president to trust me, knew that I had enough integrity to speak, the euphemism is truth to power. That I was, humble enough not to, try to outshine. The last thing you want to do is outshine the president, in something you say before Congress or in the media. But the point is, the character matters in a relationship, both for the leader and for the follower. And I had to believe that the president, that he was trustworthy, because otherwise there really can be no useful relationship. There'll always be a relationship, but it may not produce anything unless there's that kind of shared appreciation for the importance of character. Loyalty is a great one. I tugged and pulled and thought about loyalty a lot, because it's, it's often the case that loyalty will be demanded. If you're on the top, you demand those below you to be loyal. But I think that those of us who have been followers have a right to demand loyalty in the other direction as well, meaning that the leader will be loyal to us. Like, for example, the phrase disagreement, can't be considered disloyal until the decision is made. So in the period of time when the leader or the executive is taking inputs to a decision, and a lot of leaders, it's pretty clear, you'll probably know where they stand before you ever engage them. And if you're at all concerned that and you may not agree, you might disagree. If you're concerned that they're going to consider that disloyal, it's going to mute you. It'll mute most people. It may not mute everyone. So I was always really careful. And by the way, so was President Obama. He would, in fact, there were times when he would, I won't say deliberately mislead us in the sit room, but he would, it wouldn't be apparent, where he was going to come down on a particular issue. And by the way, it didn't drive me crazy, but it would drive, the appointed and the cabinet members, it would drive them nuts, because they want to know, what does the president want? And he was very coy about sometimes I knew where he stood, like on levels of troops in Afghanistan and things. It was pretty clear what he wanted to do. But in other cases, I didn't know exactly what he wanted to do. And that's because he wanted to, elicit honest advice that wouldn't be colored by the fear that, oh my God, maybe I'm telling the president something he doesn't want to hear. But the other thing about him was, I never felt like if I disagreed with him that he would consider it disloyalty. Now, any leader, whether it's a president or a CEO or a military commander, a hospital administrator, they take the inputs. At some point, they make a decision. Now, once the decision is made, then loyalty takes on a different aspect, actually. Then with the decision made, it feels to me like we have two choices as followers. We either follow the guidance we're given, or because it's either, it rubs uncomfortably against our sense of fairness or legality or ethics, then you say, I can't live with that. And you go find another way to make a living. But until the decision is made, I think, it's a leader's responsibility to make it clear that disagreement is not disloyalty. And it's a follower's responsibility to have the courage to give advice, even if they think it may not be exactly what the boss wants to hear. So loyalty is important. I have two other attributes. I've a bunch of them actually, but there's two others I've kind of tugged and pulled on in my own thoughts. One is, I call it sensible skepticism. We live in an era where it's just really hard to figure out, what's true and what's not true, or what's half true. And so I think we all need to be a little more skeptical, actually. Certainly I have friends who are not at all skeptical about the news. And I'm thinking, really? First of all, what are you watching? And secondly, watch something else. So, I just think you have to be a little skeptical, sensibly skeptical about information. And what that does is drives you to be personally inquisitive, which is another trait I think that's important in both leaders and followers. And then the other one is responsibly rebellious. You'll never find that on an organizational chart of values. And I don't think any boss I've ever known would say, I want you to be rebellious. But you can find it in the culture of an organization where it's okay to push on the edges, as long as you're not pushing on the edges for your own self-aggrandizement or your own personal gain. If you're pushing on the edges in order to make the organization better and your team more effective and successful, then I think a little responsible rebelliousness is a good thing. So, those are a couple of the traits I think that leaders and followers ought to come to some agreement about. Whenever I talk to leaders about taking over a new position, to include my daughter, who just became a CEO of a healthcare startup, And, she said, how should I mean, I think she had her own instincts, but she was nice enough to ask her father. And I said, well, look, here, in your first meetings with them, here's a couple of things, just tell them to remember. And, we went down some of these traits. I used her phrase, actually, which was say it in the room. When she was not the CEO, it drove her crazy that the CEO would have a meeting and, go around the table and nobody say anything. And then she'd walk out the door and they'd all be standing around his water cooler, pardon my language, but bitching about the meeting. And so when she became the CEO, she said, look, we're not going to get anything done if the water cooler is more important than the boardroom. So how about we say it in the room? And now she had other traits that encouraged them to do that the previous CEO lacked. So, you have to be yourself, but I do think that, traits like character and loyalty and sensible skepticism and responsible rebelliousness help. Over. Thanks,
sir. So just keeping an eye on the clock, sir, for you, about a little over 5 minutes, probably till you need to make a move there. You talk about, especially with that vignette with your daughter there, building a team or preparation before a crisis. Do you have any sort of thoughts on selecting personnel or spending time in preparation for a crisis before crises hit, so that way you can act accordingly and not be building the ship after a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of answered, in some ways, you answered your own question. I use a lot of case studies to teach crisis leadership and crisis management here at Fuqua. And, and one of the very clear teaching points is that organizations that are, well-led, inclusive, and that have an environment and a climate of trust before a crisis do a heck of a lot better in the crisis. And the corollary is also true. If if you're a CEO who's been kind of draconian and doesn't have the instincts we've been talking about, and then you get to the crisis, you're not going to do well. The organization doesn't turn on a dime just because there's a crisis. Generally the organization, you can see it time and time again, whether it's Wendy's or Toyota or Johnson & Johnson, or the Challenger disaster, the organizations that have come out on the other side of crises well, it's generally because they had invested in themselves and their team and their climate before the crisis occurred. So, I mean, that should be kind of a clarion call to all of us, although we all say, let's not waste the crisis, the time to prepare for that, to have that opportunity is now before we have one. I mean, look at whatever you believe about the pandemic, and, we're so close to the election that you can tell I'm being really, I'm just trying to stay out of that spiral. But whatever you believe about the pandemic, I don't think anybody can say that it's created the opportunity for greater trust. I mean, how can anybody say that? And so, we look back and say, why is that true? Why did it become just another divisive factor in America? And the answer is because the team that we've all elected, and I'm using that term, to describe both sides of the aisle, the team that we elected several years ago didn't have a relationship, didn't have any trust, really. And so, it's why would we be shocked that, that we got the outcome we have? Now, the good news is, in our system of government, by the way, I'm a believer in our system of government. It's, some of you may not have ever thought about it this way, but it's intended to create friction. That's the way our system was designed, to create friction among the branches of government, friction within a branch of government. Now, ideally, that friction is turned by positive leadership into creative friction. you know, you all drive cars. You realize, you know, you're all studying business, not physics, but the car won't go anywhere unless there's friction between the tires and the road. I mean, that's the reality of friction. You have to have friction to get anything done, anything worthwhile done. But it's got to be creative, and I think we've lacked that creative friction for some time. By the way, not just the last 4 years. I've been in and out of Washington, D.C. since the late 90s. And I think probably I would say that there's been these ebbs and flows of corrosive friction over that period of time. My aspiration for you is that your generation will probably find us having lacked a little bit in that regard, and that we can, given the system we have that does flush itself from time to time, we can recover both nationally, but also inside your own organizations. You know, for example, I'm pretty proud of the way the military has navigated this crisis. I'm pretty proud of the way the NBA. I mean, you know, I'm a consultant, not a member of the NBA, but I think they've found a way to balance things. Not, by the way, not perfectly. I mean, like I said, you know, what's success these days? Is it 95% or is it 75%? But the point is, it's because those two organizations I've just described had a solid foundation of leadership and trust in themselves going in, and so they were able to, to take the crisis and turn it to some opportunity. And that's where we need to get. I mean, but you can't do it in the moment, unfortunately. You got to work on it before you're in it.
Yes, sir. So real briefly, sir, just one last question. You studied English here at Duke a few years back. If you're familiar with the poem "If" by Rudyard Kipling, for those that may not know, I can drop it in the chat. You can look at it.
If you can keep your head while all around you are losing theirs. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. If that would be a good capstone to end this discussion, if you wanted to share any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure Kipling could have foreseen the 21st century, but look, here's what my advice to you is to aspire to be the kind of leader that you would like to lead you. You know what I mean? It's no more complicated than that. There's a really good book by a guy named Anton Mott. It's not a really good book. It's a decent book, actually. It's really thick. It's a fiction work. It's about World War II. So it's kind of a historical fiction about World War II. And it juxtaposes two different kinds of leaders. One who is unbelievably ambitious, but doesn't care who he crushes to get to the top. And the other one comes up through the ranks. They actually both make it to be general officers. But what the book proposes is to say, which of these would you like to be? And of course, the one that comes up through the ranks is humble and a hard worker and cares about people. And at the end of the book, this is where I was heading. At the end of the book, he's got a protege with him. Protege is a captain. And the captain, they have a moment of peace and quiet near the end of the war. Actually, it was after the war, but they have a moment of peace and quiet. And the captain says to this particular character by the name of Sam Damon, he said, "General, how do I get to be the kind of leader that you are?" First of all, I love the fact that he didn't say, "How do I get to be a general?" I hate that question. But he said, "How do you get to be the kind of leader you are?" And the general reflected for a moment. He said, "Well, look, if it ever comes down to a choice between being a good officer or a good person, be a good person." I love that. So, if it ever comes down to being a good CEO or a good person, be a good person. And you'll probably end up being a pretty damn good CEO. And the inverse is also true, unfortunately. So look, by the way, I'm around, and we can do this again sometime. I feel like I probably confused you more than helped you, but it's your own fault, because I saw that image of the shirt and now I feel like I got to get on it. So there you have it.
All right, sir. Well, thank you so much. We know you have a class to get to. Thank you for spending time with us this morning, and we hope to see you around school. And then I'll hand it back to Alexis.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Teddy. And thank you so much, General Dempsey, for lending your time to us today. We really appreciate it. Some of the things you spoke about, to do a brief recap, one antidote to fear is a sense of belonging. Family life is a bit like a bank account. We actually spend more time as followers than leaders in our lives. The key characteristics of a leader are humility, loyalty, character. And finally, as you were just saying, if there's one takeaway from today, it's aspire to be the type of leader that you would like to lead you. So thank you again so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you around Fuqua, whether in person or virtually.
Yeah, well, I'll be behind a mask, so I'm not sure we'll recognize each other, but we'll hopefully that won't be forever as well. Anyway, take care. And by the way, congratulations on being here. You know what a great school it is and how hard it is to get here. And I'll be counting on you to be good leaders well beyond the halls of Fuqua. So thanks very much.